Hi everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to learn about periods of English literature. This video is going to be helpful for the candidates who are preparing for UGC-NET English and also to the candidates who are preparing for state eligibility test English conducted by various states. And this video is also going to be helpful for the candidates who are preparing for degree lecturer English, junior lecturer, postgraduate teacher and trained graduate teacher, and also school assistant English. And this video is also going to be helpful for the candidates who are pursuing MA English and BA English. And this video is also going to be helpful for the candidates who are preparing for MA English entrance exam. So let's jump into the video. Here you can see various periods of English literature. English literature starts with Old English period. This is also known as Anglo-Saxon period. And Old English period started in the year 450 and it lasts till 1066. So the period from 450 to 1066 is known as Old English period. It is also known as Anglo-Saxon period. And the second period in English literature is 1066 to 1500, which is known as Middle English period. Especially the period from 1100 to 1350 is known as Anglo-Norman period. And the third period in the history of English literature is Renaissance, and it started in the year 1500 and it lasts till 1660. So the period from 1500 to 1660 is known as Renaissance. Renaissance period is also known as Early Modern period. Renaissance period is again subdivided into 4 periods, and basing upon the rulers of that particular period, they are subdivided into Renaissance is subdivided into 4 ages, 4 periods. And the first period in Renaissance is 1558 to 1603, which is known as the period is Elizabethan age, because during Elizabethan age it named after Queen Elizabeth, who was the ruler in England during 1558 to 1603. So this period is known as Elizabethan period. And 1603 to 1625, it is named after the ruler James I, so Jacobean age. And from 1625 to 1649 is known as Caroline age, and it was named after Charles I. And the period from 1649 to 1660 is known as Commonwealth period or Puritan interregnum. So Renaissance period subdivided into 4 periods. And the fourth important period in the history of English literature is Neoclassical period. From the year 1660 to 1785 is called as Neoclassical period. And the first period under Neoclassical period is 1660 to 1700, which is Restoration period. So Neoclassical period again subdivided into 3 periods. They are Restoration period, Augustan age or Age of Sensibility or Age of Johnson. So the period from 1660 to 1700 is known as Restoration period. And from the year 1700 to 1745 is known as Augustan age. Augustan age is also popularly known as Age of Pope. And from the year 1745 to 1785 is known as Age of Sensibility. Age of sensibility is also known as Age of Johnson. Age of Pope, which means Age of Alexander Pope. Age of Johnson, which means Age of Samuel Johnson. And the next important period in the history of English literature, Romantic period. From the year 1785 to 1832 is known as Romantic period. As we move further into the video, I am going to give detailed explanation about each age and each period. And from the year 1832 to 1901 is known as Victorian period. And Victorian period is again subdivided into three periods: early Victorian, mid Victorian, and late Victorian. The period from 1832 to 1848 is known as early Victorian period. And 1848 to 1870 is known as mid Victorian period. And 1870 to 1901 is known as late Victorian period. And the next period in the history of English literature, and the seventh period, is modern period. Modern period started in the year 1901 and it ended till 1945. And again it's subdivided into two periods, that is Edwardian period and Georgian period. From the year 1901 to 1914 is known as Edwardian period. And from the year 1914 to 1939 is known as Georgian period. And the eighth important period in the history of English literature is post-war period, which started in the year 1945 and it lasts till 1970. And the last period, which is present to postmodern period, 1970 onwards. So this is all about various periods in the history of English literature. Yes, here you can see, I'm going to repeat the ages: Old English period, Middle English period, Renaissance, Elizabethan age, Jacobean age, Caroline age, Commonwealth or Puritan interregnum, Neoclassical period subdivided into Restoration age, Augustan age, Age of sensibility, and Romantic period, Victorian period, early Victorian period, mid Victorian period, and late Victorian period. Modern period, which is subdivided into Edwardian period and Georgian period, and post-war period, and present to postmodern period. Yes, if you like the content, click on the like button. If you find it as useful, let me know in the comment box. Now we will see in detail about each period in the history of English literature. Yes. 450 to 1066. From the year 450 to 1066 is known as Old English period. Old English period is also known as Anglo-Saxon period. Yes, here during this period there were playwrights and poets who were majorly anonymous. There is no particular authorship for the text which were available during this time. And the major book, Beowulf, was the major book which was found during this period. And when it comes to important points during this period, oral tradition was very famous. The poems and other literary things were transcended through generations only through oral tradition. Oral tradition was very famous during this time. And epic poetry, Beowulf was one of the epics which was emerged during the Anglo-Saxon period, that is Old English period. And most of the texts were based on religious contents and influence of Germanic culture. Yes, Germanic culture influence was more on the literature which was produced during the Old English period. and the rulers during this period were Anglo-Saxon kings. Example, Alfred the Great. So, Old English period was named after Anglo-Saxons. That's why Old English period is also known as Anglo-Saxon period. It was named after Anglo-Saxon kings. And the second period in the history of English literature is Middle English period, 1066 to 1500. And the major playwrights during this time produced mystery and morality plays, like examples are Everyman. And the famous poets during this period was Geoffrey Chaucer, who produced his magnum opus, that is Canterbury Tales. And we will see in detail about Geoffrey Chaucer and other poets and other playwrights of each period in detail in the upcoming videos. And the important points related to this Middle English period, which is also known as Anglo-Norman period. Norman influence, yes, Norman tribe influence was there on English literature, which was produced during the period of Middle English. And rise of vernacular literature and religious drama. Yes, religious drama took its pace in this during this period, and rise of vernacular literature. There were more emphasis on vernacular languages while producing the literature. When it comes to rulers, Norman kings like William the Conqueror and Henry II, these were the kings who ruled England during the period of Middle English. That's why Middle English period is also known as Anglo-Norman period, and it was named after Norman kings. And the next period in the history of English literature is Renaissance, which is very important for any English literature student. And Renaissance spans from 1500 to 1660. From the year 1500 to 1660 in the history of English literature is known as Renaissance period. Renaissance is also known as early modern period. And the famous playwrights during this period were William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson. And the major poets during Renaissance period were Edmund Spenser, John Donne, and who belongs to metaphysical poets. And the novelists and the writers during this period was Thomas More, who written his magnum opus, which is known as Utopia. Utopia is one of the famous works written by Thomas More. And the important points related to Renaissance period is humanism and revival of classical learning. Theatre flourishes. Yes, theatre flourished like anything during this period, especially during Elizabethan period, with the great dramatists, with great playwrights like William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson. And during this period, humanism rose to importance. The writers and the playwrights given importance to humanism and revival of classical learning. Yes, Renaissance is nothing but revival of the literature and revival of the lifestyle of the current situations. So they revived the classical learning. They followed the classical rules of literature while producing these texts. And the rulers during this period was majorly Tudor dynasty by Henry VIII and also Elizabeth I, which is who is the ruler during the Elizabethan period, and early Stuarts like James I and Charles I. James I ruled during the Jacobean period. Jacobean period was named after James I, and Caroline period named after Charles I. Yes, especially when it comes to Elizabethan age, and the ruler was Elizabeth I. She belongs to Tudor dynasty, and the period from 1558 to 1603 is known as Elizabethan age. And during this time, the famous works were the Shakespeare's tragedies and also the expansion of drama. Yes, Shakespeare ruled the theatre during Elizabethan period, especially his tragedies were very popular during Elizabethan period, and the expansion of drama, this is Elizabethan is also known as the golden age of drama, English drama. And the next period, Jacobean age, the period from 1603 to 1625 is known as Jacobean age. Jacobean age was named after James I, who belongs to Stuart dynasty. And during this time, the tragedies were very darker and Johnson's comedies. Yes, during this time, the, the tragedies which were produced during Jacobean period were darker in their tone, and also Johnson's comedies. Ben Jonson produced comedies during the Jacobean age. And the next period or next age is Caroline age. Caroline age starts from the year 1625 and it spanned around 1649. So the period from 1625 to 1649 is known as Caroline age. During Caroline age, Caroline age was named after King Charles I, who also belongs to Stuart dynasty, and the major literature during this time was based on the courts. That's why the courtly literature and civil war influence. And Puritan interregnum, or also known as Commonwealth period. So the period from 1649 to 1660 is known as Commonwealth period. During this time, Puritan censorship was there, and there was no theaters were banned during this period, and only the religious writings rose to fame. Only the literature was completely based on religion. So religious writing was popular during this time. There were no dramas because there was a ban on theaters across England from the period 1649 to 1660. So this period is known as Commonwealth period, also known as Puritan interregnum. There was no king during this period. Parliament took over the charge of ruling on a democracy, on the rules of democracy. So there was censorship on drama and also theater. And the next important period in the history of English literature is Neoclassical period. From the year 1660 to 1785 is known as Neoclassical period. During this time, the famous playwrights were Restoration dramatists like John Dryden and William Congreve, and the poets like Alexander Pope and John Milton. John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, and also it's a sequel, Paradise Regained, and also he wrote a essay on censorship, that is Areopagitica. And also here you can see the novelists like Daniel Defoe, who wrote a famous work Robinson Crusoe, and Samuel Richardson. And the important points related to this neoclassical period is rationalism, satire, and rise of the novel. Yes, rationalism was on its top during this period, and satire was the major genre which was deployed by all the novelists and all the writers. Especially when it comes to Alexander Pope, he wrote the greatest mock epic, greatest satire, that is The Rape of the Lock, and Rise of the Novel. Yes, rise of the middle classes, rise of the education among the middle classes, which gave rise to the rise of the English novel, and novels were popularly known as the pocket theaters during this time. And here I am giving you a small task, that who gave the statement that novels are the pocket theaters. Which author gave this statement? And the rulers during this period were Restoration monarchs like Charles II and Hanoverians like George I to George III. So, restoration of the monarchy, restoration of the ruling, restoration of the reign by King Charles II. That's why it is named as restoration period, which is nothing but restoration of the monarchy of Charles II. And it is subdivided into various periods like restoration period from the year 1660 to 1700. And during the restoration period, comedy of manners was very popular, and theaters reopened during restoration period after the completion of the Puritan interregnum. When Charles II took charge as the as the ruler of England, theaters were open. That's why theaters were reopened, and there was more emphasis on the dramas, especially comedy of manners. And the next age in the neoclassical period is Augustan age. From the year 1700 to 1745 is known as Augustan age. And during this time, classical imitation and satirical poetry, and especially of Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope, Augustan is also known as Age of Pope, Age of Alexander Pope. Pope wrote, just now we discussed that Alexander Pope wrote The Rape of the Lock, and also he translated Homer's classic epics like Iliad and Odyssey. You can see the translations of Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, and Alexander Pope translated them into English language. So classical imitation in the rules of writing, literature rules of writing, poems and other writings, majorly you can see the classical imitation during this period. And the poems were especially satirical in their tone. And the next period in under neoclassical period is Age of Sensibility. Age of Sensibility is also known as Age of Johnson. Age of Samuel Johnson. From the year 1745 to 1785 is known as Age of Sensibility. And during this period, emotional literature was produced, and the age was majorly influenced by Samuel Johnson. As we all know, Samuel Johnson is popular for producing the first dictionary in the English language, and he also wrote a major work like Lives of Poets. In that work, he discussed about the life stories of many poets. And here I am giving you another task to you, that how many poets were discussed, how many biographies of poets discussed in the work of Samuel Johnson, that is Lives of Poets. Yes, how many poets were discussed in Samuel Johnson's Lives of Poets? And also I am giving you one more repeated question in various exams of English literature, and the question is, who is the biographer of Samuel Johnson? Who is the biographer of Dr. Samuel Johnson? And yes, you can comment those two questions in the comment box. And the next period in the history of English literature is 1785 to 1832, which is known as Romantic period. Yes, and the major poets during this Romantic period were William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, they wrote a book called Lyrical Ballads. Yes, it's a collection of poems. The major contribution was by William Wordsworth. So, the publication of lyrical ballads is also sometimes considered as the beginning of the Romantic period, the beginning of the Romantic literature. And other poets during Romantic period were John Keats and P.B. Shelley, that is Percy Bysshe Shelley. And the novelists during this period majorly focused on Gothic novels like Anne Radcliffe. And the important points related to Romantic period are emphasis on nature, imagination, and individualism. Yes, during this period, the major themes of their poems were nature, especially William Wordsworth and John Keats' poems. If you observe their poems, you will see lots of importance was given to nature and imagination. As we all know, Samuel Taylor Coleridge introduced the concepts of primary imagination and secondary imagination during this period. And individualism was popular during this period. And the rulers during this period were George III and the Regency period by George IV. And the next period, 1832 to 1901, which is known as Victorian period, which is the longest period in the history of English literature. So the period from 1832 to 1901 is known as Victorian period, and it was named after Queen Victoria. And the major novelists during this period were Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, Bronte sisters, Emily Bronte, Anna Bronte, and George Eliot. And the major poets during this period were Alfred Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning. And the important points related to this Victorian period were industrialization, social realism, and moral themes. Yes, industrialization was introduced during this period, and the major influence of industrialization was there on the works of each and every novelist and poets. And social realism and moral themes were used in their literary works. When it comes to ruler of this period, Queen Victoria ruled England during this period. So it was named after Queen Victoria, Victorian period, and it was subdivided into various periods. Early Victorian period, and from the year 1832 to 1848 is known as early Victorian period. And during this period, we can observe social reform literature. The literature was majorly to provoke the society towards social reforms. And the second period under Victorian period is mid-Victorian period. From the year 1848 to 1870 is known as mid-Victorian period. During this time, novel took its zenith, and it is also here you can see the peak of the novel production. During this time, novel production, most of the novels of English literature were published during this time. And the last period in Victorian period, under Victorian period, is late Victorian period. And from the year 1872 to 1901 is known as aestheticism and decadence. Yes, Again, we discuss about all these periods in detail. When we discuss about each period, there is a lot of importance to aestheticism and decadence in the history of English literature. So the period from 1870 to 1901 is known as late Victorian period. So the next period, 1901 to 1945, is known as modern period, and the major playwrights during this time were George Bernard Shaw and T.S. Eliot. And the major poets during this time, T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats. W.B. Yeats' poems were majorly under religious themes. When it comes to T.S. Eliot, yes, I'm giving you a small task to all the viewers, that what is the magnum opus, what is the major work written by T.S. Eliot. This is one of the major works of T.S. Eliot, and also this is the best work of T.S. Eliot, and it is also one of the greatest works produced in the history of English literature. There will be a question on this work in every exam related to English literature. So name the major work, the magnum opus of T.S. Eliot. And the major novelists during this period were Virginia Woolf and James Joyce. Yes, James Joyce related to the stream of consciousness, and he introduced this concept of stream of consciousness. And the important points during this period are experimentation. Yes, we can see the experimentation in the writing styles and choosing the themes while writing, while producing the texts. And World War One impact was there, and fragmentation in art. Yes, we can see fragmentation in art. And the rulers during this period were Edward VII and George V and Edward VIII and George VI. These were the rulers who ruled England during this period called modern period. And it is again subdivided into two periods. Modern period, which spans from 1901 to 1945, is again subdivided into two periods, that is Edwardian period and Georgian period. Edwardian period started in the year 1901 to 1914. So the period from 1901 to 1914 is known as Edwardian period. And we can see the optimism before World War One. Yes, we can see the optimism in the works produced during this period, like literature. We can see the optimism in the themes chosen by the writers before World War One. And the next period is Georgian period, which spans around 1914 to 1939. 1914 to 1939 is known as Georgian period. During this period, the major poetry, major literature was based on war, and the major poetry that was produced during this period was based on war. So war poetry was very famous during this period. And social change, yes, and the writers and the poets wants to bring social change during this period by using their art forms, by using their literature. They want to see the changes in the society. That's why social change was also one of the major motto during this period. And the next and last period in the history of English literature is post-war period. From the year 1945 to 1970 is known as post-war period. And during this time, the major writers are Philip Larkin, Doris Lessing, John Osborne, and who is famous for his Angry Young Men. When it comes to the important points related to post-war period, During this time, reconstruction and decline of empire and social realism. Yes, these were the major things we can see during post-war period. Yes, decline of the empire, decline of the rulers, we can see during this post-war period. And during this time, rulers were post-war British governments like Labour and Conservatives. Yes, there were no rulers during these periods. And when it comes to the last period, that is present to postmodern period, which is present, which started in the year 1972 to the present year, is known as postmodern period. And the major authors during this period are Salman Rushdie, Kazuo Ishiguro, and Margaret Atwood. And the important points related to intertextuality, multiculturalism, and experimental forms. Yes, we can see the texts and we can see the literature which is produced during this period is from across various cultures, and many colonial writers entered into the field of English literature and they produced their literature. And we can see the experimental forms and multicultural influence and also intertextuality in the literature produced during this period. And the modern monarchs who ruled during this time were Elizabeth II and Charles III. And as we all know, democratic governments we can see during this period. This is all about various periods of English literature. And if you like the content, click on the like button and share it to your friends and subscribe to our channel AK 97 English Literature. And if you want to get more videos and if you want to get more information on any topic, let me know in the comment box. I am here to respond and here to produce videos on your demand. So this is all about this video. And for very soon I am going to provide these notes in the format of PDFs. So the candidates who are interested in this preparation, let me know in the comment box. And if you want me to make videos on any topic and if you want to suggest any topics, feel free to suggest in the comment box. Your response, your feedbacks gives me motivation to make more content, more quality content. So subscribe to our channel for more quality content on English literature. Thank you for watching.